age, I was talking to this guy named GK, and he was one of the co-founders of DivX. And I asked GK, how do I get investors for my startup? And GK said, you don't want investors. They're just gonna take too much control. Actually, that's not exactly what he said, but that's essentially what he said. His words were a lot more colorful, which I cannot repeat on live stream in case my mother's watching. And years later, I thought, well, GK, this can't happen to me. But years later, I realized that GK was right, and that was some really good advice. And when I was getting booted out of a successful company that I started, I talked to my attorney, Adam Bloom, and I said, Adam, how come Mark Zuckerberg gets to run his company and I don't get to run mine? And Adam said, well, Isaiah, it's because Mark's paperwork was founder friendly, and your founding agreements were not. We tried to get me out of there. I tried to sell and I tried to compete. I couldn't do anything. I was handcuffed by this contract I had signed when I was a lot younger and didn't really understand the implications of this stuff. So I find out, wow, I'm going through this battle, and I'm like, this happened to Steve Jobs. I'm not the only one who dealt with this. This happened to Sean Parker. Sean Parker is a guy who's founded Napster. He founded Plaxo. We all know what happened with Napster. Everyone remembers what happened with Napster, right? This is a young crowd.
They don't know what Napster is.
Napster used to be the cool iTunes, okay? It used to be free. It was like the first idea of that, and they got anyway. Then he started this company called Plaxo, which was like the first sort of LinkedIn kind of thing. And he had co-founder and investor issues, and he got booted out of there. And a month after getting booted out of Plaxo, he hooks up with Mark Zuckerberg, and he tells him a secret that becomes an answer to a commonly held question that investors ask, which is, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? Has anyone ever heard this question before? Mm-hmm. You've heard that, Anna? Yeah, Anna's an entrepreneur, and the investors typically ask you, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? And Sean came up with a novel answer that he gave to Mark, and his answer was, why not both? Rich and king. And because of this answer, Mark Zuckerberg was able to walk into a room of Wall Street investors in 2012 as IPO in a hoodie. And guess what? He's still the CEO of Facebook today. If you look at how it turned out for investors, you can see that Facebook, if you bought $10,000 of stock in Facebook in 2013, by the way, who bought $10,000 of stock in Facebook in 2013? Who bought any stock in? Okay, well, should have seen it coming. Mark had the control of the company, and it turned out real well. And it turns out this isn't just something that happened to Mark Zuckerberg. This happened at Google. A shareholder who bought in to the Google IPO in 2004 got an 18 times return. And I started to research this and found that Credit Suisse has this list of companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Nike, Alibaba, where these are all super founder-controlled companies. And they all outperform their peers by at least 4% per year, which adds up when it's a big company and it's adding up every year. So they call it an investment class with an asset class with a compelling investment case. That's to quote them verbatim. And here's the report. You can find it online, the CS Family 1000, and that's the data that they track. The blue line being the family-owned companies outperforming their peers. So I was in the middle of this fight with my investors, and I called up my friend Lindsay. And Lindsay said, Isaiah, why are you focusing on this fight with your investors? Why don't you do something that makes them irrelevant? Why don't you innovate? And I thought, wow, that's a really novel concept. What if I could take the same contract that Sean Parker helped Mark Zuckerberg get, and what if I could give that to every founder on the planet? That'd be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I was in the middle of this, and it was hard going, and I couldn't do that kind of a heavy lift. But then a miracle happened. my investors and I settled. And as soon as the ink dried on the check, I decided it was time to pay it forward to other entrepreneurs. So I hooked up with these guys. Dan Flanagan's on the left. He was a former partner of mine. Adam Bloom's my attorney, who I mentioned. And we started talking about what is it going to take to get this contract that Sean Parker gave to help Mark Zuckerberg get, and what's it going to take to roll this out to every founder on the planet. And at first it was hard to imagine this, because every contract, whether it's a bylaw or a founder employment agreement, can be different depending on the state, depending on the parties, etc. So we started with just making a list of all the stuff that went wrong with co-founders and all the stuff that went wrong with investors in our previous companies, and we had this list, and it just kept proliferating. There's just so many things that we wish we would have done differently that we didn't do. And from that list, we asked a question, we asked a new question. Instead of how do we make legal documents, we asked how do we make a standard that wraps around all the legal documents. And from that, we came up with a set of principles that we call the founder-friendly standard. They attach to any legal document, and you can go to an attorney for a recommended flat fee of $300 and bring them this form. This is the founder-friendly standard adjudication form. And they'll just read through your legal documents and click yes, no, yes, no. So this is intelligence from hard-earned experience. We studied the boards of public companies. We went to shareholder meetings. I went to shareholder meeting of Kimberly-Clark. I went to the AT&T shareholder meeting, the Exxon shareholder meeting. I got to meet boards of directors and CEOs of companies, and after doing all this talking, we're like, we can codify this. We can codify a new social contract between founders and investors. And this is significant because these are the companies that end up growing up. Every big company was a small company at some point. So what would the world, just to give you an idea of how important standards are, just imagine what it would be like to have an electrical grid that didn't have the same standard as an electrical grid in another city. You couldn't find a toaster that would cook your toast correctly. You wouldn't be able to find a washing machine that would spin your clothes clean. So if we put, and there's even a standard, by the way, for brewing tea. This is ISO 3103. So if we're putting all this effort into breakfast and tea leaves, where are the standards for the next companies that will power the economy? The founder-friendly standard seeks to answer that question. It can help an investment fund who's giving money to VCs bypass the VC and go directly to the companies themselves under optionality, a new type of financial product that we're working on. It can help a company like a big multinational company diversify their R&D and build trust with founders to be able to launch companies to tackle their R&D problems, and it gives a framework for building trust there. And under this standard, it creates a new platform for the next Googles, the next Facebooks, the next Berkshire Hathaways to exist. So entrepreneurs have been going through all this hard work to build companies, and they've had this headwind of corporate governance that is a little outdated in my opinion. But now that there's this new standard, and by the way, these entrepreneurs have built great companies. There's no doubt about it. We have a great economy, great entrepreneurs building companies. But under this new kind of standard, imagine the next generation of Googles and Facebooks and Nikes and Berkshire Hathaways that we can get. And we got there because we changed the question from do you want to be rich or do you want to be king to where is the hands-off capital? And that's the next chapter of the story that we're writing. So if you want to tweet about this, tweeting is encouraged. Videos, pictures. You can tweet about the founder-friendly standard, #founder-friendly standard. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rachel.